Guys, welcome back. So by the time you're seeing this, we are officially into 2020. So happy New Year. Hope everybody had a great New Year's Eve. Hope your 2020 is off to a great start, even though we're only about 2 days in. But anyway, I wanted to share with you my December wrap up, as well as some stats from 2019 and how I did reading wise. Okay, so before I dive into all of the books that I read in December, let me give you a quick rundown about how my 2019 year in books went in general. I don't know about you guys, but I always find it fascinating to know these stats behind the entire year of reading and how the numbers break down and all that jazz. So if you're not interested in this part, I'll go ahead and put in the description a timestamp of when you can skip forward to the actual book rundown. But if you're like me and you're into that kind of stuff, here we go. So in 2019, I read a total of 73 books, and out of all of those, 27 of them were audiobook, 25 of them were ebooks from my Kindle, 21 of them were physical books, and of those ebooks, audiobooks, and physical book combination, 14 of them I got from the library, and that's using a combination of going to my actual library and checking them out physically, or using the Libby app to listen to the audiobook. I don't think I checked out any ebooks, but either way, those are the numbers. So let's see. As far as star ratings go, I had 15 5 stars, which is fantastic, 23 4-star, 33 3-star, 2 2-stars, and luckily 0 1-star reviews. So I'm definitely going to call that a win in terms of a good reading year. All right, so let's go down into the genre, shall we? So let's see, I read 69 fiction books and 4 nonfiction books. Now, if we want to break that down even further in terms of nonfiction, I read 1 autobiography and 3 personal development books. And switching gears to fiction, let's break down that genre. And I read 35 romances, 12 cozy mysteries, 22 mystery/thrillers, and I didn't read any YA this year. So as far as my top 3 favorites go, I had to write them down because I had a lot of 5-star reviews. If you guys saw that video I did a couple of weeks ago, but that was talking about all of the books that I rated 5 stars. These are my top 3, which it was hard to decide. But eventually I settled on An Unwanted Guest by Sherry Lapina. I know you guys have heard me rave about that before. Princess Jellyfish, which is a super cute manga and the first manga that I ever read. And then lastly, The Morning Miracle, which I actually read in December, and I will talk about as soon as I dive into my December wrap-up. As far as the bottom 3 books go, my least favorite books, I've got One Book in the Grave, which is a cozy mystery that I read during a reading weekend vlog I did a couple of months back. Double Blind, which is this mystery that's part of the Kendra Michaels series. And lastly, The Sitterford Mysteries, which is also a book that I read this month by Agatha Christie, and unfortunately it was a disappointment. So lastly, kind of rounding out all of the figures, as far as new releases versus backlist items, I read 7 books that came out in 2019, and then the rest, which I think totals up to 66 if I'm doing my math right, were backlist. So all around, not bad. I will say, looking at this list and kind of seeing how each of the genres break down, I might make it a goal of mine to be a more dynamic reader going into 2020, but we will see how that pans out. I'm still making my, at least before this video comes out, I'm still kind of making my 2020 bookish resolutions, and so expect a video on that if I decide to share with you guys where I want to go. Okay, now for the wrap-up part. In total, I read 11 books in December. Hold on, let me count really quick just to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yep, I read 11 books in December, some of them audiobooks, others Kindle, others physical. I actually dusted off my Kindle for the first time in a while this month, so I got a lot of reading done via that. So let's go ahead and dive into, I guess just chronologically, all of the books that I read this month. The first one is called The Morning Miracle by Hal Elrod. I have talked about this book before, so I won't get into too much detail, but essentially it is a personal development book that tells you how you can wake up in the morning and what kind of routine you can create in the morning so that you can live your best life, essentially. I did rate that one 5 stars. So again, if it sounds familiar, it's because you probably saw it in my 5 stars of 2019 video. Next up, we have Atomic Habits by James Clear. This was another personal development book and another 5-star read, if I'm being honest. But this one essentially teaches you how to break your bad habits and to form new habits. And what I really like about this book is that even though it's personal development, it's not preachy, and it gives you very practical advice about how you can break and rebuild habits. Next, I read Postmortem by Patricia Cornwell. This was actually the first book in her K. Scarpetta series, and I really enjoyed this one. It had been on my TBR for a while, and the first book, which was this one, it came out a while ago, but I wanted to go ahead and start the first book in this series because it does seem like the kind of series that you need to start from the beginning. But this one was disturbing and realistic and fleshed out, anything and everything that I could want in a procedural crime thriller. It delivered. I really enjoyed it, and to be honest, this was one of the most recent books that kind of had that creep factor for me, just because the villain and all of his heinous acts were so accurately portrayed that it had me kind of hesitant to read this book at night. Next, I read We Met in December by Rosie Curtis. This book actually came out in 2018, but it seemed like the book du jour all over Bookstagram this year, even though it's a year old, because everybody was reading it, everybody was talking about it. I did fall into the hype, I will admit, but I am glad that I did because it was a super cute contemporary romance. I will say I read it wanting to kind of get into the Christmas romance spirit, but the book itself spans not just around Christmas time, but years actually. That's fine. I quickly got over that, and I really enjoyed it. I think the characters were really fleshed out. I think that the romance between our two characters had just the right amount of conflict to make it realistic for them to have reasons to stay apart. And then when they did eventually get together, it was such a huge payout, and it was totally worth it to write it out through the end, and I really enjoyed it. I will say there is another book that I read in December called We Met in December. Sorry, that's this book. One Day in December, which I kept getting the two confused because the covers look the same, the titles are the same, the plot line seems the same, but out of the two, I enjoyed this one more than the other. Coming up next, we actually have the third personal development book. I was really into personal development this month. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I was trying to implement that Morning Miracle book about waking up and listening to more personal development books. So clearly that's exactly what I did. But this one is called Unfuck Yourself by Gary John Bishop. I didn't love it as much as the other ones. It seemed like it was a lot of just talking around the bush. It didn't really hit on specific actions that you can take to kind of get out of your own head and live your best life or what have you. Unfortunately, this was one of those that kind of fell into the camp of me not necessarily being able to have any takeaways from it. So, you know, that's just my personal opinion. It is for some reason on the top selling charts. So if you are kind of looking for a personal development book and you do like that no nonsense approach, since the title is vulgar, then give this one a try. Oh man, another disappointing read. So I also read The Sitterford Mysteries by Agatha Christie this month, and it was actually part of my annual co-read with my husband. We don't really have an official title for it, but every year we read in tandem a Christmas themed Agatha Christie book. This year we settled on The Sitterford Mysteries, and it was so lackluster for me, which breaks my heart to say because I'm a huge Agatha Christie fan. But I think what it really comes down to is the fact that I was missing the quirky Poirot character in this case. This was a standalone mystery of hers which didn't feature any of the Poirot or Miss Marple characters, and instead we kind of have a side detective paired up with what I would consider an amateur sleuth. In this case, she happens to be the fiance of the guy accused of the murder. But yeah, it was just, it was so boring, if I'm being honest. I will say I did appreciate the descriptions of the English countryside, especially because it was set during the winter months, and so we've got the snow and the kind of cozy atmosphere. But aside from that, that's about it. And I will say, there was kind of like a side mystery that doesn't really have to do with the plot, but the way that it's described and as much attention as it's given in the book, I thought it was going to come around and pay off in the end, and it didn't. So I was kind of left hanging in the end, which was another disappointment. Okay, so luckily after the Sitterford Mysteries, I read the Christmas Pact, or rather I listened to it. It was an audiobook, Audible exclusive narration, and it's by Vi Keelan and Penelope Ward. Oh man, I rated this one 5 stars. It was perfect. The narration was super cute. It wasn't a long read, and it definitely fulfilled all of that Christmassy vibes that I was looking for the whole month, because I think at this point I had read about 3 Christmassy, or what I believe to be Christmassy books, and I was really wanting to get into the mood. This book did it for me. I thought it was very original. I may or may not have teared up at the end. Obviously, there's a happy ever after, but it was so adorable. Both of our main characters were very fleshed out, and again, I really appreciated that because the book is not that long, so we don't have a lot of time to get to know our main characters, male and female. But in this case, I feel like I knew them well enough to want to root for them to get together. And so when they finally did at the end, and the way that they get together, it was just so romantic and so sweet. I love it so much. So this next one was another 5-star read. Luckily, it has nothing to do with Christmas, so if you do want to listen to it, please do. I highly recommend it. And that is Heidi's Guide to 4-Letter Words by Tara Sivek. And I listened to this one on Audible. This one was actually one of their short list of best books of 2019, and I totally see why. I actually had to look up after I finished listening to this book to see if it was actually a physical book that was made and then narrated, or if it was made specifically for audio, because the way that the audio done is perfection. It's about an ex-kindergarten teacher who ends up starting a podcast called Heidi's Discount Erotica, where she tries to use the erotic and romance genre to come out of her shell. She ends up falling for her next door neighbor, and it's really just the two of them trying to come together while she's also trying to come into her own. And the fact that she has a podcast and the fact that this is narrated is just amazingly put together. The narrator of the book does an excellent job, so much so to where you kind of wish that the podcast that is being portrayed in the book is a real one. I just can't recommend it enough. The length was great, the pacing was perfect, and really the story was great, but it's really the narrator that makes this book go from a 4.5 to a 5 stars. So I highly recommend it, and I definitely see why it ended up being one of the top books that Audible pumped for this year. All right, so it seems like the rest of the month I was just into romance, because these last 3 books are romance. Spoiler alert. So next we have The Design by R.S. Gray, and this one unfortunately fell a little flat for me. I did end up giving it 3 stars. I will be honest, it's probably just because of the fact that I have such a close spot in my heart for R.S. Gray and her books, but unfortunately this one just missed the mark for me. It is about a woman who is freshly out of college, and she ends up getting a job at her sister's friend's architect firm, and the friend is this hot guy who our main character woman has had a crush on for a long time, and the two end up having this...
You're a hot guy.
Nice. The two end up having this coworker-boss relationship, but the conflict is that our main character woman is really just using this job as a layover before she ends up going out of the country to kind of explore the world and do her own thing, you know, stuff that you do after graduation. Man, this book had some issues. Our main heroine was very immature. Now, I will say she recognized her shortcomings, but other than that, it still did not forgive some of the things that she did in the story. And unfortunately, one of the biggest problems is that the book lacked the hero's point of view. I think that if we had gotten the point of view from both characters, it would have made the story a little bit more well-rounded, but because we only had it from our heroine and she was immature, it just didn't jibe well, and it made it hard to suspend belief for their relationship and some of the situations that they found themselves in. Now, I will say I'm still a fan of R.S. Gray. I've actually got 2 books of hers lined up in my Kindle right now, so I'm not necessarily going to let this be a detriment. However, if you are trying to get started in her works, I would probably skip this one and go on to another one. My top 2 faves at the top of my head that I can think of is The Allure of Dean Harper and The Allure of Julian Lefray. Those are excellent works of hers, so I would probably go with those first. Next, like I said, another romance. This one is called Come Back to Bed by Kaylee Loring. This was actually my first book by the author, and it definitely won't be my last because I really enjoyed this one. It actually struck my heartstrings with 2 of my favorite references, which is You've Got Mail, my favorite movie, and Nora Ephron, my favorite director. And this one is about a woman whose landlord slash her next door neighbor ends up subleasing her own apartment to her nephew, who ends up being this hot attorney. And so the 2 of them kind of have this enemies to lovers relationship, but they're totally opposite people. We've got our heroine who is a artist, and then our lawyer guy who is a well, I just said it, he's a lawyer. But the 2 of them couldn't be more of a foil. And so in the end, the way that they get together is super sweet. I definitely will not say it's a slow burn. They end up agreeing to this no strings relationship, but obviously strings just fall from everywhere. But when they get together, it's super charming. I really enjoyed this one. It was a fast-paced read, like I said, and it had multiple laugh out loud moments, which I always appreciate in my romance. And so for that reason, I gave it 4 stars. And like I said, I will be checking out more works of this particular author. Okay, last book of December, last book of the decade, last book of 2019 that I read is called Pucked by Helena Hunting. I actually listened to this on Audible, and I guess I'll have to give it a 4 star. I will be honest, I was teetering between 3 and 4 star because there were a couple of problematic issues, but in the end, I leaned towards a 4 star because the pros outweigh the cons. This one is about a woman who ends up getting into a relationship with a hockey player despite her own personal rules about never dating hockey players because she was burned by one in the past, and her stepbrother is a hockey player and she sees all of his man-whoring ways and she just doesn't want to be in that crowd. But she ends up falling for a guy who, like I said, is a hockey player, and he changes her mind about a lot of things because he's just not like all of the other athletes who she has met before. Now, what I found problematic is some of the heroine's actions. I feel like she made unnecessary conflict when the 2 of them had an issue, something that could have been not necessarily easily resolved, but at least talked through. Instead, she just shut down and closed out, and that was frustrating just from a personal point of view. And another issue that I thought is that I think it could have been a lot shorter. Because I listened to it on audiobook, I'm not sure how many pages it is. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna look since I've got Goodreads here. Hold on. Wow. Okay, so apparently it's only 380 pages. This book felt a lot longer than that, if I'm being honest. I think that at least a 4th of it could have been cut. While I always appreciate details given to scenes and characters and just little minutia things, there's a line, and I feel like the author chose random things to describe in detail that had no payoff. For example, there's like an entire scene, actually probably multiple scenes, but at least one for sure, where our main female is describing her boyfriend's mother's hair. And again, that has no payoff. That's not relevant to the story. Like 1 or 2 one-liners here to kind of make a joke, I'm totally okay with that. But I'm pretty sure we had the equivalent of a page and a half of her just talking about this woman's hair, which that's overkill for me. But anyway, like I said, in the end, I ended up giving it a 4 star because the writing was done really well, and we got to see our characters not necessarily just get together, stay together, the end, happily ever after, but really trudge through some conflict so that when they did end up getting together at the end permanently, it made it all the more sweeter and realistic. Okay, so that was it. Like I said, I read 11 books in December. I ended up reading 73 books in 2019, which I'm super proud of, especially considering that this BookTube channel was started towards the last quarter of the year. I'm hoping that now that I have this channel and it has encouraged me to read more, my goal for next year is going to be a lot higher. Obviously, you guys will have to stick around and see if that is the truth, but anyway, let me know if you have any reading goals for 2020. Let me know how your December was in terms of books that you read. As usual, I'm always looking forward to discussing books in the comments as well as adding books to my TBR. So until next time, guys, happy 2020 and bye!
Wait a second. Are you gonna do a 100 subscribers video?
I'll wait till I get there.
Bye!
Bye!